just to get started, we're not going to go through all of them, but I just want to get you primed just a little bit to talk. So in order to do that, I'm going to see how you answered the first couple. So if you've got the first question and the answers, if you'll raise your hand, Sean's going to come to one of you, and you read the question, and then you answer it, and then I'm going to ask you a question. Okay? So, who would like to take the first? Okay, Maria, right over here.
Before we set out on any journey, we need at least two things. Answered a compelling vision of our desired destination. I put parenthesis a map, and a plan for how to get there, and I put a compass in parenthesis.
Okay. So you said any journey in life, this is just natural to us. If we really want to go somewhere, we need a compelling vision of where we want to go, and we need a plan how to get there. What was my question on this? I think I answered it. Sorry, I got to talking. But you got us going. What's that? What did you say? Did you have a question for it? Oh, okay. Unless you're Tim. That's true. That is true. Tim waits to hear which way, Lord. So that's good. That's good. Okay, let's do the second one, because the second one is related to that one. That one kind of sets us up. That's just generally in life. What about spiritual? Who would like to do the second one? Ed, did you raise your hand? Yeah.
Nurturing and,
So read the question.
Nurturing a growing spirituality with depth in our present-day culture will require a thoughtful, conscious, intentional plan for our spiritual lives. And I don't know how to say his last name. So,
Speak Scazzaro, I think, maybe.
yeah, we do not plan our spiritual lives. We're not in control. Rather, we vision our spiritual lives intentionally, giving Jesus free reign over our formation.
Okay. Does everybody agree with all the answers there in the blanks? Huh? Oh, what does Art say?
Not what Art says. I think there's a missing that idea of the compelling vision. I differ with that concept. No. I differ that concept in a way because if we're talking about our spiritual journey, I would agree with that. But if you're talking about life's journey, oftentimes that's already been directed. Sometimes we can choose, sometimes it's chosen for us. Because oftentimes what people do is they put their life in their work. You know, for 5 straight years, I put 14 hours a day teaching and coaching. 14 hours from 6 o'clock in the morning till 7, 8 o'clock at night. By the time I get home, I eat, I want to go to bed. So my whole life was involved around my work. And that is a journey. Mm-hmm. And then what about the rest of my life going to be in terms of my time with myself, with God? It's not always there. It's limited. And I think that's the struggle that we have, is that sometimes we have a journey that's already been played. That's what I call our career in our life. Is when you don't have that, when you have that time away, then all of a sudden your spiritual life comes in play. And that's where the second comes in, and that's the plan. And we don't always plan for our spiritual lives, and I think that's true. I think then what is the vision that we want for our spiritual life? And that sometimes we don't think about seriously enough to make a difference in our lives. And so I agree with that part.
Okay. All right. So let's hold that thought, and then we're going to come over here. We're still staying in this area.
I think the author is making a distinction between that we don't plan our spiritual lives. And just by the twist of one word, we plan for our spiritual lives. And he goes on, just let that sink in a second.
Mm-hmm.
We plan for it. We create spaces for it. He goes on and says, well, someone else is answering it, but you must arrange your days. You must plan for it. You don't plan it.
Yeah.
You plan for it. One little preposition makes a big difference.
It does. One preposition. So what you were saying, Art, is you were talking more about You disagree with the idea that we can plan our spiritual lives. Okay.
No, and I think when he talks about the person, before you set out on any journey, we need to do two things. I think that oftentimes the journey of life, oftentimes it revolves around our work, the occupation, the career that we all have. All have something that you want your children said, what are you going to be when you grow up? What kind of work, in other words, you're going to be? We don't talk about being in terms of character or being in terms, but then the question we have in church in our gathering, now what's the journey in terms of spiritual journey? Now that's a different question altogether. That does require a vision or a plan for ourselves. Now what is the plan for our spiritual journey? That's the next challenge. But oftentimes the journey that we have in our life is already there because we chose or we've been put into this life and spend 8 to 12, 13 hours a day in my workplace. What do we do the rest of the time?
Yeah,
And
you've broadened the concept out a little more than by saying, you know, however God put you there, you didn't decide where you're going to live, you didn't decide who your parents were going to be. There's a whole bunch of things that you didn't decide to be. You're just thrust in here and you got to do it. I think if you take his idea, though, what he's trying to say is he uses as an example. When we set out, you want to go on a vacation, a trip, a journey somewhere or whatever, you usually have a vision for why you want to go there. And just having a vision is not enough a lot of times. A lot of people, how many of you have ever had a dream or a vision, you want to do something, I really want to be this. Yeah, we do, but we don't. Why do we never accomplish it? Because we don't plan for it. Okay, so that's where he's getting at. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Hey, our original wants to start back. Can you run back over there? Wait.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
First, I think the thing is like at the start you have a vision to want to follow Jesus, but having the vision is, of course, the first step of wanting to follow Jesus, but then the second step is actually taking it in action and seeing what he did and following in his footsteps.
Okay.
And following that plan in your life.
Yeah.
To follow him.
Okay. All right. Yep. And then let's run back over here.
I think a lot of times that I agree with Art in the respect that I think a lot of times what happens is that God needs, as Jeff Fireman is some of the other folks in here, he needs telephone men, he needs painters, he needs carpenters, he needs those things to fulfill those areas, to have his people in around people. And so I think what happens is that personally I feel like that God takes our craft, our talent or whatever, and he focuses our spiritual life around that. You know, I think that what happens is that we get gifts concerning those things and around those things. I think there's a lot of teachers that have a gift that, my goodness, I would never have. It's called patience, you know.
Yeah.
There's just different things, you know, that God takes in our natural life and uses it in our spiritual life for our spiritual growth.
So yes, I don't want us to get hung up here. Y'all are making a distinction that I don't think he was making in the book, but it is a clear distinction, okay? And that is, we have something that we could just call the entirety of our life. It has a whole lot of variables that are beyond our control. It's just where our life is. But within that life, this can be true of a believer or an unbeliever, a Christian or a non-Christian. They have a life. Where's their life going, okay? They meet Jesus, okay? They have an encounter with Jesus, and now they're starting in on a spiritual life, a spiritual journey. And a lot of people you remember at the beginning of the book, it talked about don't put all your apples in just being zapped. I have a one-time zap experience with God, and that's it. And a lot of people get hung up there, and they have the zap. We'll use that. What does a zap look like? I don't know. I can't make it. Let me get that out of there. That looks stupid. Sorry. But so you got to zap, and then where does your life go from there? Well, we're still living our life, but our spiritual life is doing nothing. And so what he's saying is we can't come along, we can't plan our spiritual life because that's still in somewhat of God's control, right? We're not people who don't need God. We can just have a spiritual life without God. We're people who need a spiritual life with God. We need His Spirit. We need His Word. We need those things. We can't plan our life because we're not in control of that. And that's what he says in there. But we can plan what? For. Now, what does that mean? What's the difference between planning our spiritual life and planning for our spiritual life? Yeah, but so yes, a set of practices. What do those do for us? They create habits. But even the habits, what do they create for us? It's an S word. Space. Space for what? Space for God. Why is it that we can be zapped, regenerated, born of God, whatever it is, and then we just sit there? And we go, God, you know where I live. You have my number. You have my cell phone number. You know where my heart is at, my head, everything. Why aren't you moving in my life? Every relationship's a two-way street. God's not going to force himself. He may at times do some things that are beyond us. Yes?
I struggle with the fact that this conversation has gone and divided these two things, spiritual life and life. I struggle with that because I think that's part of the problem. I think some of the understandings of the concepts in this book help us to recognize, as you know, he quotes from Dallas Willard about spiritual formation, that we are created for spiritual formation, and that comes out in what we do every single day. So I know from my own experiences how you can get hyper spiritual and not relate to anyone in life. But I think the more that we choose to create a plan and a journey of wanting that to be more unified, to where in everything that we do, my identity, like Ed said, my identity is not fireman, paramedic. My identity is a follower of Jesus in that place. Yeah. And it's been a hard pendulum. I can confess out it's been a hard pendulum because it tends to swing spiritually to where it makes it difficult to relate to people. And then the other way where you get so in the world in order to reach the world that doesn't always look right. So finding that center, that balance, that centered space that brings these two things together, because it's interesting that it came apart. And I think that's one of the issues, even with the time we spend in community, where over the last 30, 40, 50 years, I've only been here for 50 of those, but I've just recognized that it creates a soul that's divided, spiritual and secular. So I think that's where the problem is that we go to this duality of we're just finding a way to balance that to where our spiritual life becomes our life.
I see what you're saying, Jeff. Let me tell you, and so I have misframed this by doing what I just did. Let me tell you what I think's happening to us right now, though. It's an issue of reference frames. Okay, it's the frame of reference you're starting from. What he's starting from is just this. He's just looking at this, and all of a sudden, we've enlarged our frame of reference. And it changes the way we're looking at things. He's keeping it real simple. He said, you get ready to go on a journey, what do? You for some reason, you had a vision, a dream, a desire to go there. So is it compelling enough for you to do something about it? Yes. Well, it's not going to happen unless you have a plan. But you cannot assume that your plan alone will get you there when it comes to spiritual things, because God is involved in this, okay? All we can really do is plan for the spiritual growth, to get ourselves in a place where he can do what he wants to do in our life. That's making the case for us to have spiritual practices or disciplines and never looking at those things as rules or laws, because they're never the goal. They're not the end. Okay, yes?
He's talking about planning for your spiritual life, and when you're trying to have, when you're trying to have a vision and then a plan for your spiritual life after that, you can't try to, I want to say, you can't plan your spiritual life. You can't plan for, I'm expecting the spiritual life to happen and like grow in this area of my life. It goes hand in hand with pulling in the space, because you kind of have to, I don't want to say plan to fail, but you have to plan for detours, and you have to plan for, like, if we're going with the whole like road trip analogy there, or metaphor, I don't know, I'm not English.
No, it works.
You have to plan extra time, extra gas, extra whatever it is for those detours, those hiccups in the road, because you will hit those, and that's just something that's really important to, like, I think that's really what he's trying to get at here is you have to have those, you have to plan space into the rest of your life, because if you don't plan that space, he's not going to force himself into your life unless it's something he actually, like.
There'd probably be limited minimal growth, not the maturity that we would expect, and we wonder why we don't have that at times. And so, wait a second, Eb, I got to go over here really quick. And but good point.
I think the key to this is surrendering to God.
The next chapter is all about that.
And
yes.
and that's the key.
Yeah.
Now, to go with the analogy of the trip and the travel, we're going to get on an airplane soon. I'm not going to tell the pilot which way to go. The pilot knows where to go to get me to the destination I desire to go. So we surrender when we get on that plane. We surrender what we're doing and trust that the pilot's going to get us there. Well, that's what we're doing with God. We have to surrender and say, okay, Lord, I trust you're going to get me to the destination I desire. That's right. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good, very good. And Ed wanted to say something.
Well, I don't know if I'm chasing a rabbit here or not, but I agree with what this young man was saying. And a lot of times, and I think he even uses this in a book, I really don't remember where it was used, but a lot of times if we miss that in our lives, we're like the children of Israel. We're going to go around the mountain one more time. God has a plan for our life, and he wants to see that plan fulfilled. He desperately wants to see that plan fulfilled. And so if we miss that plan, we're going to go back around the mountain. God's going to get that plan out of us. I'm not going to say he's going to crack the whip and this and that and the other. Lovingly, he's going to get that plan out of us.
So, yes, and so we've taken a lot of time just on one question. I thought this was going to be a simple one that got us deeper into this, but actually it's good because it helped us frame the whole understanding of what we're even looking at and where we're going. So I like this dialogue. We're going to run out of time here. We just got a couple of 3 or 4 minutes, but let's try to do this. You went through this. You'll go back through it now. Just by virtue of us having this kind of conversation, we're going to be more eager to look at that with a closer eye on what we're thinking about here. So what is this chapter about? A what? A rule of life. Okay, now, we don't like what word in there? Rule. Yeah, rule. Hey, wait a second. Because our nature is we don't want to be ruled. We want to self-rule, don't we? But all of a sudden we're introducing legalism. Are we? Are we introducing legalism into our Christianity here? A perspective. Yeah, a perspective. So what is he saying here? This is not, this is a rule of life singular, not what? Rules for life, plural. Rules become laws, okay? And now they dictate exactly what we have to do otherwise, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a different place. When he says a rule of life, he's not talking about a bunch of rules. So we should not look at the 9 practices or 5 practices or whatever practices you may have, and many of them can be split out into multi other things. What we're looking at are practices that help us create space. So we're finding, what is the rule of life that works for me? What is the rule of life that works for you? How many people have heard Art tell what his rule of life is before? Only 2 of us. What? He talks about it all the time. What is it? What's one of his primary practices of rule of life for Art? It's quiet time. He's been doing it for 50 years, as long as just been alive. Yeah. He goes right back. It's like that's what he was trained in, and he doesn't do it as a law. It's a delight. It's a love. He looks forward to it every morning at 4:30 or 5 or 5:30 or 6, whatever time he gets up. He goes in there and he has his coffee, I guess, and his hour, and he gets in and he opens up the Word, and he's in God's presence, and he prays, and it's not a check. I did it. I got it. Give me a star. No, it's a part of his rule for his spiritual life. And he doesn't treat it like a law. He doesn't treat it like if you don't do it exactly the way I do, then you know. No, it works for him. What's that? You want to know the lesson this morning? Sure. You got come on up here with the mic. What's the lesson for this morning?
This is a tough one, but a good one. I think the lesson is, for me this morning, God told me that the whole idea is learning to be submissive and be willing to be led. And the thing is that we were talking about in the Bible talk about Jesus being the good shepherd. And I thought, well, Lord, how come I don't think about you being a good shepherd? So I read the scriptures about God being a good shepherd. And the whole issue of the sheep is that if the sheep, or we, in my art, is being submissive to you. And am I willing to be led by you? And is that what I want to do? And I didn't realize that's exactly what the shepherd wants from a sheep. Are they submissive to me? And are they willing to be led by me? Am I willing to be led by Jesus? Am I willing to submit to Jesus? I don't want that. I want that. My quiet, yeah, you're my quiet. My quiet time is very special to me. So God brings a lot in those times. But that was this morning, and I just can't forget about that. That's my heart. But I think that one of the things here is what's missing is we talk about the way of life, the rule. One of the things that we need to do is we need, just like it says in Colossians 3:15, as you receive Christ and walk with him and being rooted, it says, but because we've been instructed with gratitude. We need to sometimes be taught to instruct how we can have that rule of life. Sometimes that's how we grow as children, where somebody is instructing us. And I think that's what's missing in discipleship. We think it's by osmosis. You automatically know how to live your life as a Christian. You already know what God wants you to do as a Christian. No, we don't. We need someone else who can say, hey, I want to show you how you can walk deeper. Here are some practices in your life. Here are some things that you can do to kind of build up in your life. Mm-hmm. That's exactly how the quiet time came to me, that God wants time with Art Boucher. And I didn't know that. I didn't know what a quiet time was after 3 years of going Bible study. I just did Bible studies and going to church. But nobody told me about spending time with God. And so that changed in my life in college, and ever since then I kept it for the past 50 plus years.
Yeah.
So I just said that's the reason why it became part of my life, because I realized that's the rule that I want to live by, and that only reason why I hold on to my faith is that time with Jesus.
So let me. This is not devil's advocate, but let me respond to what you just said. That we need instructors, okay, disciple makers. We need somebody that's a master teacher to apprentice us. And he actually makes a case in here for not necessarily having that the responsibility rests on us, okay. But he's not against that, because we're to be apprentices of Jesus. But here's the point. We've been together for a long time, and we kind of know each other and stuff like that. You bring in a book like this, and you shake it up a little bit. You think more broadly about some things, because if you just spend time with Bo or Art or Jeff or anybody else, we get the areas that we're kind of good at or like. This stretches us to go, I probably need to grow in this area or that area or another area. So I like what we're doing with this. This is not the end all. This is not the Bible, but has a lot of word in it, okay? So, but your point also here, right here, you said the same thing that Rose said, just a different word, kind of similar. They're a little bit different. I could make a distinction between them. Surrender or submission and being willing to be led. Well, that's kind of surrender, But this submission, well, never mind. I was going to say something that you could argue either way, so never mind. Intentional. That's what this is helping us understand, is intentionality.
Yes, I think it's very important that you are intentional with practicing rest, practicing communion with the Father, practicing serving others. And as it's, being intentional about being with the Father and saying, hey, my life is chaotic right now. I think I need to be intentional about that time with the Lord now.
Yes.
That's real important, I think, in this
Being
book.
intentional about creating space. And
yes.
some of us need to know what are some of those things that can do that. Well, he gives us at least 9, but you may find that 3 of those 9 are like, these are all pistons for you. You're moving with this one, and another one may not do as much for you. Doesn't mean you should neglect it necessarily, but and there are others, okay? But the point is, do I have something that helps me create space and helps me get in the place, a posturing? I look at it as a posturing where God can now speak to my life or direct my life or shape my life, form my life. And so the metric by which we value our spirituality is not how many of the 9 we have operating in our life. The metric is not how frequently we do practice these spiritual disciplines or whatever. What is the metric? He says it in the chapter. Do what? That's it, right there. It's how much we're like Jesus and how much we love. So he gives an example. It was so masterful that he put it in there. And that is that he has known people and you have known people, and maybe we are them sometimes, that will practice all these spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices in our life and have virtually very little love or Christ-likeness shaped or formed into our life, okay? And the goal is not how well I can practice fasting or how well I can practice Scripture or Sabbath or any of those other things. The goal is, how is that creating space for me to be with God and Him form His likeness, His image, His love in us. That's the metric we're looking for. Okay, so good dialogue. I love it. I hope you'll go back in because there was so much other deeper stuff. Oh, I know, right here. You and I should, on the second side, we should ask ourselves those 3 questions. You should take time sometime this week, and maybe you need the book again to read through it, but ask yourself those 3 questions in a prayerful, you're not in a hurry, not your quick knee-jerk answer, but here's your 3 questions. Do you know what your rule of life is? Because he makes the point that we all have a rule of life, didn't he? Do you remember? Not necessarily a spiritual rule of life. We just have a rule of life, something we live by. It's how we orchestrate our day. We've got our patterns, we got our relationships, we've got our commitments, we got all these things going on. We think, oh, I need to form a rule of life. Yes, but you already have one. And we have to ask ourselves, is that rule of life getting us where we want to go? Because a lot of times we have a compelling vision for something, but we don't have a plan. And so we're still living according to this old rule of life, which means I like to, I'm engaged in all the digital stuff, maybe too much. I'm into this, I'm into that, and I think, oh, it's not going to, but it's hurting, it's hindering, it might be in the way. And only you can evaluate that. Okay? So ask yourself those 3 questions. Do you know what your rule of life is? Sit down and ask yourself, do I have a rule of life that's spiritually creating space for me? If it's not, what by default is my rule of life that's guiding me, that's shaping who I am or keeping me from him or allowing me to be with him? Is it giving you the life you want, the rule of life that you have? Is it working for you, or does your rule of life work against you? Because if it's working against you, there's something that needs to change, okay? So next week we'll carry on the second part of this chapter, and let's close in prayer. Micah, would you close us out this morning? Sure. Awesome.